Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 29 on Weimar, Germany and the rise of the Nazi Party. Way! Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end. You battled your way through. This is the final video on Nazi Germany. And it follows on from the previous video, if you remember, on trying to show you how hopefully you can do well in the exam. Now, the previous video we looked at the first 3 questions and I tried to show you how you might get high marks in those 3 questions. This final video we're looking at the last 3 questions, and again I will take you through the questions and hopefully give you some advice which might help you to gain good marks. Now the first one, question 3b. Now then, ladies and gentlemen, the final 3 questions on the Nazi Germany paper, it's all about evidence. It's all about interpretations of the evidence. Way! It's as if you are a detective, ladies and gentlemen, and you are analysing and examining the evidence, the interpretations, the views, the opinions. That's what it's all about. Looking very, very carefully under the magnifying glass. Now, in the final 3 questions, they give you 2 interpretations and 2 sources of evidence. And basically, one interpretation will be about an event, giving a view or an opinion. The second interpretation will be about the same event, but it will give a different view or a different opinion or interpretation. So you've got 2 interpretations that are different about the same event. At the same time, they give you 2 sources. One source will support one interpretation of the event. The other source will support the other interpretation. And that's what they give you. Now, question 3b. Worth 4 marks. Ladies and gentlemen, only 5, 6 or 7 minutes available for this question. And it's a what question. What is the main difference between the 2 interpretations? Well, what you got to do, read both interpretations and then try to work out. Interpretation 1 is saying this, interpretation 2 is saying the other thing. When I used to teach, ladies and gentlemen, I used to have the 5 W's. Can you see that? I'm a who, where, why, what, when, how. I used to have a terrible song. I'm a who, where, why, what, when. I'm a who, where, why, what, when. I'm a who, where, why. I'm a who, where, why. I'm a who, where, why, what, when. How. It went down a storm in the classroom, as you can imagine. Terrible. But I didn't care, because it used to get my students to think about those questions. And this question is a what. What is the main difference between the 2 interpretations? Remember, only 5 minutes, so don't waste time, don't mess around. Get straight into it. Something like this would gain you the 4 marks. Interpretation 1 suggests this. And you then say what the interpretation is. Then you use the evidence. I know this because, and then you pick details from interpretation 1. 2 sentences, 2 marks. Then, on the other hand, interpretation 2 suggests this, the different view. I know this because, and then you select evidence or detail from interpretation 2 to show their opinion. Full stop. 4 sentences, 4 marks, done. Time to move on. So that's question 3b. It's a what question. What is the difference in interpretation? Then we move to question 3c. Again, just 4 marks. Again, 5, 6 or 7 minutes. It's not a what question. It's a why question, because they say suggest 1 reason, not 2 or 4 or 6, so you don't need to waste time. Suggest 1 reason why the two interpretations are different. You've already said what the difference was. Now you're going to say why they are different. And it says you may use two sources to help you. Well, here's a tip. Do use the two sources. Because remember, one source supports one interpretation and the second source supports the other. Do use those in this answer. And what you're going to say? Well, nice and straightforward. Basically, interpretation one is this. The reason from the source to support that is this, and then you select detailed evidence from the source to support the interpretation. On the other hand, interpretation 2 says this, the reason from the source, the detail from the source to support that, and then you use the other source. Giving possible reasons why. Maybe they put a different weight onto certain evidence. Maybe they've looked at different evidence. Maybe they've put a different emphasis on certain different things. And you're trying to explain why they are different. Again, maximum 4 sentences. The interpretation, the source and the reason. Interpretation 2, different source, reason. Nice and straightforward. 4 marks, you're doing well, you've got full marks there. Time to move to the last question. Question 3D. Ladies and gentlemen, 16 marks plus 4 for spag. No, not spaghetti bolognese, you fool. Spelling, punctuation and grammar. This will be assessed on this part of the question. So you've got 20 marks here. Wow. Please spend some time on this question. We're looking at maybe 25 to 30 minutes planning a good answer and delivering a good answer. Now, question 3D. What is it all about? Here we go. How far do you agree? And then they'll choose one of the interpretations. How far do you agree with that interpretation? It gives you some guidance. Use both interpretations and knowledge of the historical context, what was going on at the time. Now then, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to put a ruler on my head for no reason. Way! Now, why have I done that? Because I'm mad? No, I'm not. No. Why am I doing that then? Just to show that I can put a ruler on my head? No. It's this word, ladies and gentlemen. Balance. Because in the 3D question, I've worked out a framework for you, but the key word is balanced. You've got to give a balanced answer. Now, what do I mean by that? Ruler off? Well, I've tried to work it out for you nice and straightforward and give you 5 steps. 5 steps in the answer to 3D. And hopefully the 5 steps will get you a very high mark, a level 9. 5 to 9. Well, it's not even 5 to 9. Dolly Parton, 9 to 5. No, stop making up silly nonsense. 5 steps. And here they are. Let's have a look. So remember, it's a how far do you agree with, let's call it interpretation 1. How far do you agree with interpretation 1? Well, the first step, state what interpretation 1 is. You'll already have done that, of course, in your 3B question, so you'll know it. Interpretation 1 suggests this, and give evidence from that interpretation. Very important. You actually use evidence from the interpretation. So that's your first section. Stage 2, step 2. Show how you could agree with this view, agree with this opinion, agree with this interpretation, and use evidence from the source that backs it up. You'll already have that from question 3C. And of course, this is where you can use your own knowledge of the historical context of what was happening at that time. So go back to the idea of balance. So far you've looked at one side. You've looked at the agree. Well, of course, you've got to look at the other side. So therefore we look at the disagree. Step 3, disagree. And you're going to use the view from the other interpretation with evidence from that interpretation to show a different point of view, disagreeing with the first view. Then, of course, step 4, again, it's disagree, and you use evidence from the other source, the source that supports the disagree interpretation. And if you can, you bring in your own knowledge there of the historical context to show why you might disagree. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've looked at both sides. Look, interpretation 1 says this. Yes, you can agree that. Interpretation 1, source C, and historical knowledge, context. On the other hand, it's possible to disagree. Interpretation 2, source D, and knowledge of historical context. So now you've looked at both sides. Things are in the balance, ladies and gentlemen. Think of the question, though. Go back to the question. How far do you agree? So the 5th and final step. Give your judgment. Give your opinion. Okay? Overall, I disagree partly, or I agree partly. I disagree to some extent, or I agree to some extent because, and then you explain your reasons. If you follow that framework, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you'll be well rewarded and they will give you some very, very high marks. Now, let me just give you one example of that. I've picked a topic totally at random, the Munich Putsch. Remember, some people say the Munich Putsch was a failure. Hitler was arrested and put in prison. Others say, yeah, but long term it was a success. He realised his mistakes. He made better plans and eventually he came to power. So the Munich Putsch, depending on which way you look at it, you could say failure or success. Where are you on that? Well, imagine if they gave you that for this question. Interpretation A. It might say, Hitler was arrested, he put in prison for 5 years, therefore it failed. Interpretation 2. Hitler became famous at the trial, and then when he was in prison, he planned his tactics, so you could say it was a success in the long term. Two different interpretations. Two different views. Now, source A, let's just say it's a painting of the Munich Putsch, and it shows dead Nazis on the street shot by the police in Munich. Well, if they're dead on the street and Hitler's shown running away, then it's a failure. So source A supports interpretation A. Can you see that? If on the other hand you've got source B and it's talking about, let's say it's a speech by Hitler, and he's looking back and saying in 1923 in the Munich Putsch, we were not ready for power, we made mistakes, so we could not have taken power at that time, but I learned my lessons. Well, that's supporting the other interpretation. Can you see that? So you've got two different interpretations and two sources. Each source supports one of the interpretations. How would you build an answer for that? Remember the framework. Interpretation 1 is suggesting Munich Putsch was a failure because it shows Hitler being arrested and sent to prison for 5 years. Source A supports this because it's a painting, it's showing the Nazis dead, it's showing Hitler running away. So you've used interpretation and you used the source. Remember knowledge though. You could say, in the historical context, it was a failure because he was put in prison supposedly for 5 years. Okay? Or you could say, at the time of the Munich Putsch, the Bavarian head of secret police, Seisser, and the Bavarian head of the army, von Lossow, they both refused to help Hitler, so therefore his putsch failed. Knowledge of what was going on at the time. Or von Kahr, the Bavarian minister, swapping sides and leaving Hitler to face the failure. You've put knowledge in there. Well, where have you got that knowledge from? Video 12 on the Munich Putsch gives you the knowledge. So that's the one side saying it was a failure. On the other hand, you could argue interpretation 2 suggests that the Munich Putsch was not a failure because, and then you would say, Hitler became very famous at the trial. His name was in all the newspapers. He became quite popular for standing up for Germany. Or you could say it gave him time to plan his tactics from the interpretation. And then you use the source. Hitler admitted he was not yet ready to take power. And then you could use your knowledge. When he was in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf and planned a way forward. When he was in prison, he decided that just rioting on the streets, fighting wasn't the way forward, and he planned political progress. When he came out of prison, he then decided to make sure that the Nazis were a national party and had representatives all over Germany. Your knowledge, the source, disagreeing that the putsch was a failure. Then, of course, you give your judgment. Overall, I tend to agree that although the Munich Putsch was a failure at first, it gave him the chance for long-term success because, and then you explain, 1920s, the late 1920s, support for Hitler begins to grow. In the end, Hitler did take power. He did take control. So you could argue that it was a successful part of the path to progress. Can you see what I've done, ladies and gentlemen? It's the balance. If you try to remember that framework and apply it in the exam, you've got a good chance. So there we have it. Weimar Germany, the rise of the Nazi Party. The exam prep is there for you. Every question has been covered. Hopefully now, if you work hard, look at the videos, do the revision, hopefully you'll do well in the exam, which is what it's all about. So the Nazi Germany is finished. Hopefully you might look at some of my other series of videos if you do them for GCSE history. I'm starting a new series. It's on warfare through time. Maybe your school does that. If so, hopefully have a look at the warfare through time videos, which are coming very, very soon. As ever, it's been an absolute pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope it's been useful. All the best now. See you soon. Bye now.